Hi, Magic in the Room listeners. Today we are continuing our series on hope by replaying one of Hi, Magic in the Room listeners. Today we are continuing our series on hope by replaying one of my favorite episodes with Dr. Chan Hellman. He helps people and organizations all around the world instill hope in their employees, customers, and stakeholders. His work on hope theory forms the basis of much of our thinking and is a very practical approach to making hope real. Don't forget that you can download a guide for this episode at magicintheroom.com, and it will help you build more hope in your life. So be sure and check that out. And I hope you enjoy this episode.
Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to the Magic in the Room podcast. I am Hannah Bratterud.
And I'm Chris Province. And today I am really excited. We are joined by Chan Hellman. Chan, how are you today?
Good. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I know this is like the last day of a sabbatical for you. So to have you here with us, it's just powerful. So thank you. For our listeners, Chan is a professor of social work at the University of Oklahoma, and he's director of the Hope Research Center. Just an incredible researcher, an author. He's written over 100 publications. He presents at national and international conferences, so he's well-traveled on the topic. I think he's definitely an authority of what we're talking about today. But Chan's research is focused on hope and psychological strength, helping both children and adults overcome trauma and adversity. And I'm just really looking forward to getting into a lot of that. But something really exciting. You just published a new book called Hope Rising: How the Science of Hope Can Change Your Life. And you have a co-author on that with Casey Gwinn, published by Morgan James. So what a wonderful accomplishment. And I'd love to pull some thread on that. Like, as an accomplished author, like, how does it feel to wrap that process?
I will tell you, the writing a book was one of the hardest things professionally I've ever done, because it was very important to me that we take the science, which is what I'd been focused on for the past 15 years and all of the other scientific publications. But I am absolutely committed to developing strategies that make these simple concepts accessible to parents, to teachers, coaches, other individuals. You don't have to be a therapist with complex systems. And so for me, it was really important. And the last part of the definition, the last part of the title, how the science of hope can change your life was sort of my contribution to the idea of this is the science, and it's the single best predictor of well-being.
Wow.
That's awesome. The single best predictor of well-being. That's what we get to talk about today.
I love it.
Awesome. Well, we, staying with our tradition, every episode we start with a question of the day. So our question for today is, what are you working on getting better at?
Oh man, everything.
Right?
Myself, living, life. I'm getting better at life. I'm working on it every day. Do
you want your letter grade for last year?
Well, I hope that it will be not as good as my letter grade for this year.
Right, there you go.
And that my letter grade for next year will be even better than the one this year. So that's really, growth mindset, and we're constantly working at getting better. But the specific thing, and our listeners, if you've listened for a while, you know this about me. I'm working at getting better at running, always. And lately, I've felt a little disenchanted with running. And that's a departure, because every episode I talk about how much I love running and how important running's become in my life. And I've just kind of struggled with it a little bit. It's almost as if I've lost hope. And I didn't say that just because we have Dr. Hellman here today, but really that's how I've felt lately about running. So I'm really excited about this episode to learn how hope can be part of our strategy when we're working at getting better at something, whether it's running or leadership or any of the things that we engage in our work and our lives. I do have a race coming up next weekend as my birthday weekend, and I'm going to do a 15K trail race, and I have not been running very consistently this last month, so a little nervous about it.
Right.
I'm going to go on a long run tomorrow in the mountains of Montana and hopefully get some of my uphill legs back. But yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Well, and I'll be looking forward to next week's report and
All right.
how much hope you carried through the last 5Ks.
Okay. Well, I hope to learn some things today
Right.
that I can take with me during that race next
I
weekend.
think we got the right guest.
All right.
The thing that I'm working on getting better at, I think it's some type of accountability. It's a little different flavor, but it's this idea of when I think about something to action a piece of it. So, that's something I should do. If that's all the attention I give it, then the chances of me actually doing it are pretty slim.
Right.
But if I will think about it and tackle, 10% of the task, then the chances of me completing that task go up exponentially. So it's just like having those, pay attention to the voice in my head. Because when I see the thing and I think about doing the thing and then I don't do it, what causes suffering later is that thing that I didn't do.
Right.
Inevitably.
Yeah.
I'm like, I thought about that, but, I thought it wouldn't be an issue because of this. Well, those are the things that always become issues.
The things that remained a thought.
The things that remain a thought. Yeah.
That's good.
So, and it's different than like explicit accountability.
Right.
It's, those things that hang between urgent and important, but can still cause suffering. It's just go ahead and getting that on the radar, clipping about 10% of it off immediately, so that then it's now an active project in my life.
Right.
So that's something that I'm trying to get better at. Dr. Hellman, what about you?
Well, so this is actually just great timing in terms of this question. Last year, in the throes, last May, in the throes of this crazy time, I began training for and competing in mini triathlons. And over the last few months, I've sat around and not participated in running, biking, obviously swimming because of the weather. But so I'm slowly starting to get back into the running, which I actually cannot stand to run. It just is such a painful experience. But I'm really trying to do better at putting hope into action for me, and with that, my own personal self-care, so to speak, is participating in these mini triathlons.
Gotcha. So now you say mini triathlon. For those of us that aren't previously exposed to what that means, explain what mini means.
Sure. So a couple different names. I use just the mini triathlon to really highlight the fact that it's not the Ironman or other types of long events. Many triathlons range in distance, and so the minimum distance, which is what I participated in last summer, is a 1/4 mile swim, 12 to 15 mile bike ride, and a 5K.
Gotcha.
In that order. And this year, I'd like to extend those distances. Again, I'm a very reluctant runner, so I'm maybe a little more motivated to swim a little further and bike a little further, and maybe run a little less.
I hear you, right? Now, That's amazing, and I want to I want to ask some questions about your last experience as a triathlete as we work through this. But I wanted to frame in this concept of hope first, and just at a broad level, like what is it? Like help us understand what is it made of?
This concept of hope.
Yeah.
Great question. It's something. It's in our everyday language. I mean, we've used it several times already. I hope to do this, or in our everyday conversation. I hope you're well. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great birthday. By the way,
thank you.
Coming up. I hope there are no tornadoes. And yet, the language and science of hope goes beyond that. And so hope is the real simple definition is that hope is the belief that the future will be better than today and that we have the power to make it so, that we have a role to play in pursuing that future. So hope is about three really simple ideas: goals, pathways, and willpower. What I will highlight is that for us, hope is a way of thinking. It's a mindset. It's not an emotion. It's not a feeling. And the reason that that's so important to recognize that it's a way of thinking is because it can be taught. We know we can teach it. If hope was a feeling, if it was an emotion, we could help people manage it, at best. So the idea of hope is grounded in the nature of the goals that we set. That becomes the cornerstone. And so as a mindset, the ability for hope is being able to identify pathways or the strategies that we're going to use to pursue those goals. Being able to imagine and consider potential barriers along those pathways, engaging in problem solving to overcome those pathways. That's all referred to as the pathways thinking component. And then the final piece, which is to be agentic or agency, is our ability to be able to dedicate mental energy, mental resources to engage in those pathway pursuits. Our ability to think about control in order to pursue and accomplish goals, motivation, our ability to selectively attend to those pathway pursuits. So goals, pathways, and agency are the core components.
Okay.
Boy, what a great start. So can you speak to a little bit of how does it work? Like, how does hope work? What does it inform?
Yeah. So hope is something that is part of each and every one of us, really from infancy throughout our lifespan. The work that I've been very interested in is what are the outcomes of hope? Why is hope important? Why does it matter? But then in particular, how does the experience of adversity, how does the experience of traumatic events rob us of the ability to believe the future can be different? And more importantly, that we have the power to make it so. And then finally, the piece that I've been most interested in the last few years is what are some simple strategies that we can engage in to nurture and restore hope during times of adversity in that experience. So that's really the focus of the work for the last 15 years.
So, yeah, and I mean, obviously there's all types of disruption. I mean, we having gone through COVID in the last year, of course, economic conditions change. People lose jobs, people lose family members. Like, there's the whole grief cycle. So what is the power of hope?
Sure.
If you say, well, I hear you say, well, hope is a process, not an outcome.
Yeah.
Like, what is the power of it?
So really the first part of being able to answer that question is really letting people know that the power of hope is that it's grounded in science. That there is this robust body of evidence that really guides us in thinking about hope, thinking about its application, but more importantly, as you indicated, hope is a process for me in all of the work that we do. Hope is not the outcome. I'm not necessarily engaging in these strategies to nurture hope and then I'm finished.
Right.
For me, hope is the process, because the robust body of evidence around hope informs us that hope is one of the single best predictors of well-being for children, for adults, for families. And what we're finding increasingly is that hope is a significant predictor of organizational well-being. And so, being grounded in the science of that, we know that individuals who have increasing levels of hope have better physical outcomes. They have higher pain tolerance, for instance. Much better psychological health or mental health. They're able to manage and navigate daily stress better. And then social outcomes, better positive relationships is one of the main outcomes of hope. So really in those three broad domains.
So effectively, increased mental health, increased physical health, reduced suffering, more resilience.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to highlight, and it just popped into my mind as we were sort of discussing this, there was a recent publication that came out. There's about 4 of us across the United States that study hope.
Okay.
I studied in the context of trauma and adversity. That's really our niche. But one of the studies that just came out was really looking at how hope is a buffer to COVID-related stress. Which I found really encouraging for many different reasons. Number one, the big takeaway from the study, which wasn't a surprise to those familiar with hope, is that elevated levels of hope, individuals are managing daily stress, daily COVID-related stress better. But what I really loved about the takeaway from this article, and I think it's really important for all of us to hear in the audience as well, is that even though, for instance, I tend to score fairly high on hope, I tend to be a fairly hopeful individual, there is a real sense of being wounded and weary during this last year in particular. And, it really highlights for me the affirmation that I'm not always hopeful. I'm not always... it's just not this linear process. Some days are better than others for all of us.
Yeah.
But it's this process of hope that allows us to overcome.
Yeah, so I would love to pull some threads on that, because in my opening question of what I'm working at getting better at, right? It's easy to run when I feel great about running. And yeah, that sense of being a little weary, a little tired, a little maybe not as excited about the thing. I'm talking about running specifically here, but we can apply it to anything, right? During the pandemic and during lockdown, I think we all felt that way about life itself, right? We don't know, like our existence has been so disrupted. I don't know that the future is going to be better, right? I can have that hope, and that is my core belief, but I'm not always feeling it, right? And right now, I'm not feeling the hopefulness and excitement about running that I was just even a few months ago, right? So something you said earlier about hope can be taught, and we can learn to get better at hope. That was like a mind-blowing idea to me. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so let's put it in this context of what this last year has been like. When we're all experiencing adversity, some of us in different ways, losing jobs, kids being home from school, disruption, and all of that. In my work, we see significant increases in domestic violence, child maltreatment, etc. But here's one of the things that we've learned in this research is that when we're experiencing adversity and stress, it influences the nature of the goals we set. So what happens is when the pandemic first hit, for instance, think about how each of us responded in this fashion, because we've got this fear, this uncertainty. Every day seems to be a different day with different information and so forth. And so when we're in this presence of adversity and stress, we are much more likely to set goals that are avoidant in nature. And so when we set this goal that is about avoiding some event from occurring, it influences the way we think about how to get there, that pathways component. And when we're being driven by fear, for instance, which is potentially an emotional reaction, then that fear leads to despair, which leads to desperation. So we started to see things like hand sanitizer hoarding and all of these kinds of things. So we began to really push the idea of remembering hope during times of fear and uncertainty, because our first reaction is an emotional one. Now, what we've learned is that when we're able to increase and elevate that hope, we transition to an achievement mindset. Now, I think this is really critical for organizations, quite frankly, is do our organizational processes influence employees to set avoidant goals within the organization or achievement goals?
Oh, that's a powerful question.
It really is. And it's a mindset. It's a mindset. So for instance, as a real simple example, if I'm a basketball player and I step out on the court and my mindset is I want to get the ball so I can shoot the winning shot for my team. Now imagine that same basketball player that steps out on the court and their mindset is, I hope I don't get the ball stolen from me so I lose the game for my team. So those two different mindsets.
It's an avoidant outcome. Versus...
in the same situation, two different mindsets. Now imagine how those players react. So the one who wants to get the ball to shoot the winning shot, what are they doing that is different than the person who doesn't want to lose the game for their team? That's what I mean. And so if we have that in the context of organization, so I've become really interested in what does a hope-centered organization look like? What is a hope-informed leadership?
Sure. That's, I really, so kind of play with this, we always, in commercial applications, you always hear, well, hope is not a strategy. Now today I can say, you're right, it's not a strategy, it's a mindset. So, but you speak to this idea of pathways, making, really validating the belief that something is attainable. It's these structured pathways that say, here's how I connect where I am or current state to this vision of the future, this ideal state. As long as I can make a pathway, then there should be hope. What do we call it when there's this belief, but there's no path?
Sure. Yeah.
I think there's some different classifications of hope, right?
Yeah.
So
I like how you're saying that and sort of setting that up. So, I don't know that we're getting it necessarily today. This time of year for us in this part of Oklahoma, I mean, this is our tornado season. So, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to say, again, I hope there are no tornadoes today.
Right.
Now, if we know that hope is about goals, pathways, and willpower, the question is do I have pathways to stop tornadoes from occurring? The answer is, of course I don't.
Right.
And so what we know is that the definition of a wish is when we have a desire for an outcome, but no pathways by which to achieve it. So this is the important distinction between hoping and wishing. Now, wishing is very passive towards the goal. Hope is about taking action to pursue that goal. That's the distinction.
Interesting. Yeah. So when we talk about wishful thinking, it's really a desire without any clear path
Right.
to meet it. And I've heard, I mean, there's even a book called Hope is Not a Strategy. It's often, I do a lot of sales training. My background is in sales, and that line was brought up frequently.
Right.
Hope is not a strategy. Well, in this context, it actually is, because if we think of hope as the process through which we engage in goal pursuit and a tool to meet goals, then I would say hope is certainly at least a part of a strategy.
Yeah, very much so. And I hear this term, hope is not a strategy. It's not uncommon statement. I will tell you that the work that I've done with law enforcement, for instance, the work we've done with the Department of Defense, the U.S. military, it's a fairly common statement, and rightfully so. It's just that they're defining hope as a wish.
Yes,
Right.
right.
And when I hear this statement, well, one of the first things that I'll ask somebody is say, well, let me tell you what hope means. And then let's come back to that question, because, in the context of organizations, in the context of, let's say, the U.S. military, if hope is about setting goals, finding those strategies, and working towards motivation, it's pretty close to strategic planning.
Right. That's kind of where I was going. It's like hope is not a strategy, but instilling hope or igniting hope is for sure strategic.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because there has to be belief in that pathway. And I want to ask about a couple particulars. I'm going to tap into some of your org design background on this, but you spoke to adversity and stress changing the nature of goals that we set, and the effect of avoidant goals. Like when we have avoidant goals, there's this process of fear that can ultimately lead to desperation. Like if we were to put that particular idea, like let's talk about incentive-based compensation for a moment, and the idea of like heavy bonuses. Is that an achievement strategy to hit revenue targets, or is it an avoidance goal because I'm trying to not lose the bonus that I'm eligible for?
Yeah.
Because I mean, a lot of the executive behaviors you see both ways, right? You see the ones that say, I'm going to get all the positive outcomes, and if we get there, we get there.
Right.
And then there's the other strategies of, we're going to get there hell or high water because I can't afford to not trigger that bonus.
Right.
So can you speak to that whole idea of avoidant goals versus achievement goals in relation to incentive-based comp?
Yeah, so that's, I've never had this question before, so it's really, so thank you for that. This is the part that I like about conversations. I actually learn more about hope in this strategy. And if we think about it from an achievement or an aspirational type of perspective, as a motivational, as a driver for individuals engaging in that, as long as there is a clear vision, right, of what that goal is, but more importantly, that there are pathways that exist, maybe with some adversity, because what we find out is that high hope individuals actually like a little bit of adversity. In fact, what they will do if they're given an easy goal is they'll make it harder. Like I'll do it faster, or as a basketball player, I'll do it left-handed, kind of thing. And so, I think that as long as leadership frames it as an aspiration, as opposed to, if you don't achieve these things, this will happen. And, so that it's more punitive, as a mindset of whether or not you achieve this goal. So what's the messaging, right? Is the messaging, this is our aspiration. Maybe it's a stretch goal, which is fine. But it's possible. It's possible.
And if you need help, I'll help you.
Yes.
I'm here to support, and I'll be checking in, and the importance of check-ins and just those, what do you need that you don't have, and those leadership behaviors are, and what I would ask the folks listening is, like, let's take that inventory
Right.
of our organizations and consider, like, if you're an organization that has, a considerable incentive compensation component, like, what is that communication from leadership or from comp? Like, how does it feel?
One of the things that is really interesting in the literature is that leaders who have scored higher on hope tend to be perceived by their employees as transformational. Whereas those same leaders who score lower on hope are viewed as transactional by their employees. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because hope is about goals, pathways, willpower. Well, that transformational leadership, that visionary component, that influence, that identity, that we're connected,
Right.
It all aligns really well with the science of hope.
And we'd love to talk about purpose and identity. So can you speak to the role of purpose and its interplay with hope?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that is very consistent in the literature is that individuals who tend to be more hopeful find purpose and meaning in their life, in their experiences, even in the presence of trauma and adversity. For instance, I was homeless throughout high school, and while I wouldn't wish that on anybody, and I wish I hadn't experienced those things, those experiences have helped me become the person that I am today, and that gives hope meaning. So that purpose of who I am and why I'm here and what my role is in my community is very important. It's a very consistent research finding that we tend to see much higher meaningfulness in work, meaningfulness in family, meaningfulness in relationship that drives that purpose.
Sure.
Wow. So we also talk about, in the context of purpose, and we talk about intentional leadership and how can leaders be intentional about integrating hope or instilling hope into both the individuals that they're charged to lead and in the organizations that they are leaders in.
Right. So I would say the last 4 years, I have been really focused on building training programs for organizations. And it's a 3-phase training program that starts with just an overview, kind of a keynote style. And I'll kind of, as a professor, what we learn is that we don't answer your questions directly, right? We're going to pontificate for a while.
Sure.
I'll try to do it quickly, though.
We all do it. We may not be professors, but we sure like to act like.
Well, so, the idea is to really create an awareness and understanding of this language of hope and the science and power of hope. So we've actually developed an executive leadership training program around hope, a leadership training, and then really an employee level of training around hope. Because if we're going to begin to influence the culture within an organization, we have to realize that everybody has a role to play. This isn't just about training the staff to be able to incorporate hope, let's say in sales. One application of that would be to recognize that my potential customers all have goals. I'm a pathway to helping them achieve that goal through this product line. That's a really interesting and potentially important conversation. But if leadership up the line isn't prepared to support that philosophically, so that's the idea of this training. So staff direct contact with customers. That's the way we train it. Is how does this play out in the work that you do? With that sort of frontline and mid-level management, it's really much more about not the customers, but the staff. What is hope-informed leadership when it comes to working with staff? I think it was Napoleon who even made the statement, right? The role of leadership is to instill hope.
Wow.
And then at the executive level, it's really creating that vision, really creating, this framework about what we are. So for me, that's why it's so important for organizations to consider that this key philosophy describes who you are, the purpose, and what you do.
Sure.
And if it can become a valued concept, because the science is good, we see significant, employees with higher levels of hope have significantly lower burnout, significantly lower turnover, higher performance in the workplace. We've published research showing that, individuals who are exposed to the trauma of others, first responders, for instance, physicians, we find that it's this idea called secondary traumatic stress.
Right.
This vicarious trauma that we, inherit through our empathy with others, begins to take a personal toll. But what we've found is that the connection between that secondary traumatic stress and burnout disappears when we introduce hope.
Wow, that's so amazing. And I mean, I think on the face of it, it makes a ton of sense, right? What you're saying, and it's exciting to know that there's science and research to back that up, because, I mean, if I do believe that the future will be better than today, and that I have the power to do something about it and to make it so, then I'm not going to experience as much burnout, because I know that there will be an end to the suffering, because the future will be better.
That's right.
I think that's maybe scratching at the role of suffering and adversity. I tend to look at adversity as positive because it's what makes us better. But it's in the context of, if I can see adversity and experience suffering and know that this too shall pass, the future will be better, and I have agency, I can be an active participant in changing my circumstance, ending the suffering, minimizing it, alleviating the pain. We talk about alleviating pain and sales, and I thought that was really interesting too, the door you opened up there about how sales can be a hope strategy if you can help your customers have more hope, because of the product or the service that you're going to provide is going to help improve their lives in some way.
That's right.
This is really powerful stuff. I think it's so interesting because it ties together a lot of the concepts that we talk about a lot, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to, spend another moment in the weeds, and then I'll pull us out. But, I think about that supervisor relationship being the mediating, really being the mediating factor.
Our relationship with our direct supervisor.
Right. So our relationship as a team member to our direct supervisor, or the person that we report to, it has such a mediating effect on our performance and our engagement with the organization. But I'd love your feedback on this, because we believe a best practice for career development and performance management is essentially for the director and the subordinate to reverse roles, where the person that's the team member is saying, here's where I want to go, understanding where the organization's purpose, I here's the things that I believe I can contribute, and here's the things I need from you, Mr. Director, that can help me accomplish exactly these things.
Right.
And then you're able to feed that back and say, hey, I love where your head's at. I love the character that you're displaying. You're concerned for the organization. If we nudge this a little bit, let's try to get this too. Like, if you want to be greedy because you're the director and you want to stretch us out, let's go. But the director assumes this idea of, I'm here to support you, make sure you have high quality resource and responsiveness in your growth and maturity in your career within this organization. There's a lot of reluctance in the market to accept that as a best practice, because we've just done it the other way for so long.
Right.
Like, you're a 5 or you're a 3, and all the broken shit that comes with that, But can you speak to kind of inverting that relationship for for career development or performance management, and how the hope dynamics can change when we do that.
Great timing. We've actually worked with about 3 organizations on this exact issue. One is a district attorney's office in the state of Washington with all of, imagine this, right? Imagine employing hope to a bunch of assistant district attorneys whose role it is to put people in prison,
Right.
Wow.
or jail.
Yeah.
And then a couple of other organizations that are doing really amazing work. And so, we start to talk about this idea of goal alignment, right? That the goals of the employee, are they aligned with the goals of the organization? And so what we've done is we've created this sort of hope-centered performance appraisal process, for lack of a better word. And it was this frustration with circling a number.
Yeah.
Because, I might feel like you've done a 5 and somebody beside me as a supervisor says, well, nobody's a 5.
Right.
So, there's no consistency,
Right.
in all of that. So here's a really simple example. Let's say that my goal is to get my teenage son, by the way, my kids are in their 30s, so this is a true hypothetical.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's say that my goal is to get my teenage son to mow the yard. Now, my teenage son does not share that goal,
Hey,
right?
like showing up to work on time.
But I've learned that giving my son $20 to mow the yard is a pathway to getting my goal achieved. Now, my son, his goal is to get $20, and mowing the yard is a pathway for him to achieve his goal.
Oh.
So what we start to look at doing with supervisors and leadership is to really let's deconstruct this in the language of hope. So we've created this process where, let's say on a form, here's the organization's mission or purpose.
Right.
Here are the department's goals or
Objectives, right, whatever.
And so what we do, and we've got a whole worksheet process for this, is we ask the employee to identify 2 or more personal and professional goals that are aligned with the purpose and the goals. And then we leave 1 space for personal aspiration.
Yeah.
And so the idea then is now the employee can see how my professional goals are aligned with the organization. And then we have this whole process of going through describing that. But by being able to allow the employee 1 aspirational goal, and it may be personal, it may be professional, maybe my goal is I want to gain experience and education and connectedness because while I really love and excel, let's say, at this for-profit industry, my heart is really in this nonprofit world, right? And I would really like it someday to be an executive director. Well, how many wonderful opportunities in the workplace for professional development could take place? And if we just have that conversation about goals and pathways, because ultimately, once we achieve a goal, it's nothing but a pathway to the next goal that we have.
Right.
And so I think hope has a lot of power in this conversation.
And I think with that, in order for that process or any other, I guess, progressive or high performance people practice to really fire, we have to be willing to be intentional.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to circle the number and do it the ineffective way.
Yeah.
And it's about being effective, and sometimes that requires courage and intentionality.
Yes.
So those are concepts that we're trying to kind of turn on its ear a little bit, and but it's not easy for these groundbreaking organizations. It does feel different than where they've been. It requires additional effort on the part of the supervisor, but how much more valuable and how much more meaning is it when we're here to do what you're doing today together, but I'm trying to support you in your vision of success. We're not like, in no way are we transacting. Like, this job today that you have that we're going to perform wildly successful in is a pathway to your goal, not where I want to keep you, not where when I'm trying to extract value from your labor. I'm trying to develop you and move you on your journey.
Boy, I just love the way that you framed all of that. Intention and helping you on your journey. Hope's the single best predictor of well-being.
Yeah.
And so, helping that employee, that staff on their journey is really focused on that. I will tell you that because so much of my work is in human service nonprofit organizations, I begin to think about program services as pathways. I think our organizations are, in fact, pathways of hope. The hard work is the agency piece. The hard work is getting people motivated and the ability to sustain that motivation to engage in those programs. So in our training program, once we teach the language of hope, once you experience it for yourself in our curriculum, then we take a step back and we say, if hope is the single best predictor, and we can sit around and talk about all the things you're already doing that align with this, how do we do it with intention?
Right.
That's the key.
Yeah, and then I'd like to extend that further as we think about employees. And so you talked about kind of the 3 levels of training in hope for executives, for leadership, or middle management, and for employees. You talked about, in nonprofit, our services, our pathway to hope, or however you phrased that.
Yeah, you got it.
I think about it in terms of, the lifeblood or even the heartbeat of any organization, of a for-profit company, is its customers. So if we can take that same approach, because what we've learned about transformational leadership, it also is true for the transformational consumer. There's a really interesting book by Tara Nicole. I'm blanking on her name right now, but it'll come to me. But it's called The Transformational Consumer. And it's really about, what is it that customers really want? Well, it's what all people want, right? We want transformation in some way, right? We want to be healthier, wealthier, or wiser. Somewhere along those lines lie our goals. And if we can, if our organization can become a vehicle of hope, that as a customer, I can become healthier, I can become wealthier, or I can become wiser because of engaging with you in this, that becomes a transformational customer experience versus a transactional one.
Right.
Where I'm like, well, I got to buy toilet paper, so I'm going to transact, right? Or I'm going to become a raging fan of this brand because you're helping me get better at life at one of those 3 areas, or all 3.
Yeah, hope for me is the theory of change. That's what it is. Wow. And at the heart of change is our ability to understand the way things are right now in our lives.
Yeah.
And that we can begin to imagine the way things could be. That, to me, is the heart of hope. And if we can imagine the way things could be, and we believe we have the power to make it so, that's where hope is born.
Sure. When we talk about intentional leadership, there's a lot of conversation, where we focus is, building structures, cultivating mindset, and embracing accountability. The idea that we can move from where we are to where we want to be without hope is it's not possible. If we're going to change condition, if we're going to change our state, we have to have this thing. But I want to talk for a moment about like under-resourced communities or environments where it's hard to find it. Our organization does work in the arena of sex trafficking and are involved with some wonderful boards and organizations, and that anywhere there's like a lack of resource, there tends to be a lack of hope.
Right.
So talk to me a little bit about the work of Hope Research Center, about your work and how we find or instill or ignite or activate hope within those places.
Sure. So, I love the question, and I do get it quite frequently. Almost every formal presentation that I give, this will eventually surface. So, let's talk about it structurally first. Especially in this time, really pronounced over the last year. Earlier this week, I did a keynote for judges in the state of Washington, and it was a recognition of the year anniversary of George Floyd. And so it was very pronounced in this law enforcement, community.
Yeah.
And, so if I talk about hope as goals, pathways, willpower, then I have to recognize that as a full professor at the University of Oklahoma, I have access to resources and pathways that other people don't have access to. Right. So first and foremost, it limits those options, those pathways that are available. It also highlights this thing that I think it's important for us. Again, let's think about sex trafficking or domestic violence or child maltreatment or homelessness or other types of social, difficulties. And, one of the common phrases that we have as a society is where there's a will, there's a way. If you just want it bad enough, you can get it. That's not always true.
Right.
And so we have to be really careful about, and that's very much a hope statement. Agency is our willpower. If you just have motivation enough, you'll find that pathway. So we have to recognize the limitations. In sex trafficking, some of the work we've done, and domestic violence in particular, which has some related kinds of issues, it's a systemic isolation, where the perpetrator is the pathway. And so, as dysfunctional as that is, that's the scenario. And so one of the things that we really focus on is recognizing how does trauma and adversity influence the way we set goals and the way we think about pathways. And one of the things that we've learned is, I'll give you a really simple example. And it's something I think we can all imagine in our heads. Let's say that we've got a middle school age student who's laying their head down on the desk during class. They're just not engaged, not participating. Now, if hope is about goals, pathways, and willpower, and I go up to this apathetic youth and I say, "What are your goals?" How's that youth going to respond to me, right? And keep it clean. I know but they're going to say, "I don't have any goals." Right. I've got to, okay. What we know about adversity is we're much better in the short term than we are in the long term. And when I say, what are your goals, that is so broad. It has so little meaning. So somebody coming out of trafficking or starting those first steps, what are your goals, has little to no meaning. So what we have to really lean into is, what are your goals this week? What are we, start in those small steps. And then the pathways component, we actually refer to that as the stepping process. So in order to achieve this goal this week, what are the 5 things that I have to accomplish? And what is that order? In order to get to this goal, what has to happen? In order for that to happen, so I'm working backwards on identifying those sub-goals or benchmarks. And there are 2 key takeaways that I just have to make sure that we talk about. And the research has identified this, it is a driver in our training. 2 things. First and foremost, hope begets hope.
Yeah.
Hope begets hope. And what that means is, as I take that first step and I have a successful first step today towards that goal, it demonstrates for me that the future is possible. That's so critical, especially in these programs of people coming out of trafficking and these adversities. They have to know that it's possible. So hope begets hope. And then the other thing, and it's the most important takeaway, hope is a social gift. Hope is something that occurs in relationships. It occurs in our ability to be connected to others. And so survivors have to have somebody authentically ready, willing, and able to walk that journey with them.
That's powerful.
Very powerful.
And it is, I think that applies service-based, nonprofit, for-profit.
It does.
Like anyone looking to accomplish anything.
And
needs to
anywhere
have
there's
someone walking
humans.
that path with them.
Yeah.
That's right.
When we talk about, a couple of things, I bring some context here organizationally. A lot of times when we do workshop, I do a visual where I'm standing on the other side of the finish line, encouraging my team to join me, versus going behind them and nudging them forward, right, and supporting them in that experience. In that non-profit space, you have this continuum, this episode of care and journey from awareness to reentry, if we're talking about domestic violence or trafficking. But it's the system, those systems being set up to take them through every gate, and just, I can't wait to talk to you way more off this podcast about how those systems, right, you get a lot of systemic gaps in that continuum of care. So, I definitely look forward to visiting more about that. But so that idea of hope being a social gift, if I was to feed this back and say, am I taking away that the best way to ignite hope in communities or under-resourced environments is to go in there and travel the journey with them?
It is. One of the things that we've really looked at, again, over the last couple of years that really emerged from these conversations is if we know that the science of hope is so strong, one of the single best predictors of well-being across the lifespan, physical, psychologically, socially, what would the power of collective hope look like? Right? And so I start to think about that within an organization. But more importantly, within a community. So think about all the social movements over the last year. Right? Those are the systemic kinds of issues that motivated a group of individuals or groups of individuals to begin to come together for a collective vision of the way things could be, that they couldn't achieve individually, but collectively look at what's happening, right? Which then generates that collective willpower. And I'm really interested in that.
Me too.
Really interested in
I've got a lot of diagrams hanging on this one, so I look forward to talking more through about the idea of what is organizational identity, organizational well-being, collective conscience, collective will, ultimately building that collective character and how that organization shows up to market. But is that the all-encompassing thing? I don't know. It's what we got to talk through and figure out.
That's right.
But it's just been great to explore this. This is not a topic that, there's 4 people that do what you do, and counting you.
Yeah.
So it's not a topic we get to sit down and really excavate on a whole lot. So thank you for just the exposure and the learning and going through this with us. But I'd love to share, if people want to connect with you, learn more about what you do, the Hope Research Center, how do they get a hold of you?
Sure. So there are 2 ways to get a hold of me and the way that the work that I do. For the training component, it's chanhellman.com. It's probably one of the most creative website names I could ever think of, chanhellman.com. For the research component through the University of Oklahoma, it is tulsa.ou.edu/hope. Pretty easy to find on Google for both of those.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, I look forward to staying engaged and just, exploring our learnings together. And thank you so much for contributing to our community and sharing what you know with the courageous leaders that are listening out there. Hannah, you want to take any takeaways from today, or you want to sign us out?
Yeah, I mean, just this was such a enriching conversation. I certainly learned a lot. I learned, first of all, that hope can be learned. And I learned that hope is the belief that the future will be better than today and that I have the power to make it so. And I think in all of the work that we do with leaders, this is going to become part of the way we teach intentional leadership and how leadership can be intentional in terms of instilling hope and teaching hope, and just recognizing, how we break down hope in terms of goals, pathways, and agency or willpower. I feel like this is almost like a little bit of a missing link to some of the work that we've been doing and helps pull some of the framework together. So looking forward to many more conversations. And for all of you out there listening, you can learn more about the work that we do at Purpose and Performance Group by visiting our website, purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, any of the social media outlets. Please join our Facebook community where we share a lot of the science of leadership, and we'll be sure to engage with some of Dr. Hellman's content as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Chen, for joining us. Until next time.